I think her rebelliousness and her desire to always do things her way, yeah, it could be brilliant, but it could also be destructive. I think it was, yeah, both.
Carrie Courogen, welcome to Underexposed. You have written a wonderful book on a wonderful filmmaker, Elaine May, one of our favorites here. The book is called Miss May Does Not Exist. It is out on St. Martin's Press now. The New York Times called this book compulsively readable, and I have to say, having read it, I felt the same. I relished every moment I could pick it up, and I dreaded having to put it down. But for those of us who don't know much about Elaine May, how did you pick her as a subject for your first book?
Um, I mean, first of all, thank you for those kind words about the book. How I picked Elaine for the subject, I think it was partly, yeah, because a lot of people I found had not heard of Elaine May and didn't know who she was. And I remember writing like a little profile around when she was getting her Tony and thinking, I can't believe there's not a book on her. I can't believe she's the supporting character in the books about so many other great people that she worked with, but never the center of her own story. And of course, part of saying that was like, I can't believe, but also like, duh, I know why there's no book about her. And I don't know, I guess I was just like insane enough to be like, I'm gonna do it.
You encountered a lot of obstacles, right? On your way, at least from Elaine, you tried to reach her, you tried to get access to her. So it's a unique challenge that you took on to write this book. Can you tell me a little bit about how you set about that and how you first gained access to people that knew her and sort of your approach to putting the pieces together?
It was challenging to say the least. I had like a two-pronged approach. Part of me was a little bit like, I don't know, overly confident and naive a little bit, where I was just like, okay, I've interviewed people that she's worked with before and similarly cagey subjects, and I don't know why. I just somehow like endear myself to these older, grumpier people who are like not keen to do interviews. Maybe, I just gotta like get in front of her, or I just have to have somebody put in a good word and I can convince her that I'm not somebody to like fear. But on the other side of the coin, I was kind of like, yeah, that's not going to happen. The chances that that will happen are so, so slim that I have to build into this story the fact that I don't have access and the fact that she is cagey and she doesn't give access to anyone. And, you know, the reason why there hasn't been a biography of her yet is because she's actively fought having a biography of herself written. And I had to make that mystery of like, why is she silent? Why is she choosing um to not speak and to not own her own narrative that I think was really spun out by other people. In terms of getting people to talk who worked with her, I mean, it was just a lot of like cold emails to publicists. And I think once you get a couple of people to talk to you, then it's easier to get more people to talk because most of the time they will say like, who else have you spoken to? And once you can kind of name a couple of names, they're like, oh, okay.
There's so many things to talk about. Her involvement with the beginnings of improv, all of her work with Mike Nichols, obviously, but I think for this purposes of this conversation, I want to restrict it to her film work, her writing and directing. The first being The Heartbreak Kid, which the production went actually quite well, and the second being Mikey and Nicky, where the production went not so well. We'll start with The Heartbreak Kid. Download what you can tell us about this production.
Yeah, The Heartbreak Kid. It's an original screenplay by Neil Simon, and he chose not to direct it. The producer knew Elaine through someone and somehow got her on board. And I think it was just sort of like one of those situations where she knew if she agreed to do this, she could get her next movie made, Mikey and Nicky. And it was a more well-oiled machine than her first film, A New Leaf, and definitely more so than Mikey and Nicky. And I think it's mostly because she had guardrails in place. Like she couldn't change Neil Simon's dialogue, which she sort of did. And she added a lot of like non-dialogue to it that sort of changed the meaning. I mean, it's a different sort of Neil Simon movie. It's not like laugh a minute sort of punchline or set up punchline onto the next. There's a lot of silence built in and a lot of like humanizing moments of improvisation. And she had a really tight deadline. She wasn't working for a major studio. So it was really like, this is the amount of money and the amount of time you have. So you have that constriction to be creative within. But like once you run out of time and once you run out of money, there is no more going back to, say, a Paramount or a Columbia and saying, I'm just not done. I need more. There's no way you can stretch out the timeline because like the movie just has to be done. It can't be labored over the way she would treat some of her other projects. She is somebody who needs to be reined in. You kind of have to like hold on to her while you keep both feet on the ground. Otherwise, she's going to float off into space. And I say that like complimentary. Like she's so creative and her mind is always working that somebody has to step in and say, like, this is great, but like it's time to just do it instead of stop thinking about it.
That is probably the thing that fascinated me most about reading this book is just as a director myself, I have a lot of strong thoughts and feelings about the way to direct, and it was really fascinating but infuriating to see her self-destruct in a way, just her commitment to constantly exploring and knowing no restraints was difficult for me to accept. But like, I wonder from your perspective as someone who studied her work and her life so thoroughly, were these antics an aspect of her genius, or were they maybe aspects of other parts of her personality that hurt her more than they helped?
I think it's both. I think the fact that she was always constantly exploring and constantly reshaping a film or reshaping what a performance could be or how something could be played, I think that led to such unique, I mean, it's a very brief oeuvre, but like such a unique point of view and such a unique body of work. But at the same time, you know, it is only a brief body of work because of that sort of spiraling out and constant devotion to exploration. It's something that I think is self-destructive within the environment she was working. Like she wasn't making these films independently. She wasn't her own boss. You know, she wasn't answering to no one. She was answering to a major corporation. And yes, that sucks in some ways, the limitations on art that the major studios can place on a director, but at the same time, it's just like something about the business that you sort of have to accept and know that you're working within like maybe a not so great situation, but it is a situation for your movie to get made at all. I think her rebelliousness and her desire to always do things her way, yeah, it could be brilliant, but it could also be destructive. I think it was, yeah, both.
How deep did you go on like analyzing the different drafts of the script and how and the kind of different cuts of the movie as far as you could tell, like how different they were? I'm curious just to know like if those explorations actually did in fact lead to better results.
There were some situations where, you know, I'd read the script and in the case of a bunch of her films that maybe be like one draft that you could find. You couldn't find multiple. You know, in case of the Heartbreak Kid, on paper, it really does read like just another Neil Simon movie. It reads very sitcom-y. And I think the way that she explores it on screen and the way that she stretches things out and makes her actors like just sit in the discomfort. I know Neil Simon had a big issue with her putting in a scene where where Charles Grodin and Jeannie Berlin sing in the car on their way to their honeymoon. And he's like, where does it say they do that in the script? And she's like, this is something that shows you who these people are. Little touches like that, I think, made the film better, made all of her films better. But of course, there are some moments, and depends on what script and what film, where you read it and you're like, this would be a pretty good movie if you shot it exactly as it were. And in some situations, I think it's more on the post-production end where it was less like, I want to explore everything that I can do. It was more like, I just don't want to set this in stone, not in a way that like when you're on set and you're doing it, it gives your actors room to explore all the different ways to play it. When you're in post and you can't decide, it becomes a situation where she's rewriting scenes and she's kind of doing these shortcuts to make things work, but you can see the seams, and it's a little bit like that's funny, but it also looks sloppy and feels a little sloppy. Yeah, I think like there's a certain point where you have to say enough is enough, or like this is the film.
Are there things that you as a writer learned studying Elaine's writing that you brought into your own?
Oh, yeah, her attention to detail is insane. Um, yeah, reading the notes that she had on the Tootsie script, little things where I already thought I had a pretty good eye for stage truth. Like when I watch a movie and I see people behave in ways, or especially have dialogue where I'm like, people don't talk like that in real life. That is stage truth. That is not reality. It drives me insane. And I thought I had a pretty good grasp on that and a pretty like highly attuned radar for it. And then I read the Tootsie script, and there are certain things in it that, had I seen it on screen as it was written, I probably would have been like, yes, that makes sense, that works. But she would take like a single line, a single throwaway line, and explain like in a page long margin comment, like this person wouldn't say this to this person at this stage of their relationship. It reads to me as creepy, like it's not true, it's manipulative. Here's how I would reframe it, and here's why, and you can take this or leave it. But like she could sniff out the artifice in just the tiniest detail. And I don't know, I thought it was so fascinating, and I learned so much from it that now I'm just, I don't know, I think it's also made me like hypercritical of my own work, that I think influenced me a little too much.
And that's a pretty good segue to Mikey and Nicky. The first time I saw that movie, I lazily assumed it was a John Cassavetes movie. I didn't even look at who directed it. I just kind of was like, oh, like this looks like one they just kind of dashed off and shot like a two-hander. And no, that is not the case. Tell us about the production of Mikey and Nicky.
I mean, it's so fair to think that it's a Cassavetes movie. I kind of thought the same thing at first, and I production of that though is so much. I mean, Cassavetes movies are their own sort of crazy productions, but most of the time I feel like he kept things pretty tight because he was like paying for it himself. But Elaine is making this sort of spiritually Cassavetes film, and freewheeling and seemingly improvised, but it's not. It's tightly scripted. She's making this movie with Paramount's money, and she goes way over budget. She shoots way too much film. I can't remember the exact number, but something like 300 hours or something like that, or some preposterous amount of film where, again, it's she's thinking, I want to have every possible way this scene could be played, and I will sculpt it in the edit, which is, I get that as a writer, but it's so much easier to do when you are working as a writer and not as a filmmaker and not as an editor, because it gets really expensive to do that. And she, goes way over deadline filming it, and is just like full of all these situations where she's changing her mind about what she wants, like an hour before they're supposed to to shoot, and everything's been set up and the lighting is ready to go, and then she's like, well, why don't we shoot it outside actually, or why don't we change the way this street is laid out? And they're like, you can't do that. Little things like that. And I think working with somebody like John Cassavetes like didn't help her in a way, because he was always like, yeah, let's do it, why don't we shoot this scene in the dark, it's more truthful. And then everyone's like, you can't see anything. He really encouraged her in that way, which, again, good for creativity, good if you're doing it with your own movie, bad if you are answering to a corporate boss who, the second they cut you the check, you're the enemy. They're just looking for more ways to be pissed with you. So all of that is happening on production. And then again, post-production is like, it takes her like 2 or 3 years to edit this movie because there's so much footage. She just keeps recutting it, like going through editors too. Like different editors coming and going because the production is lasting, post-production is lasting so long. And people were saying, we think she doesn't even want to finish it. She just doesn't want to let go of it, which I get it. It's a movie that she had written originally as a play at least 20 years before. It's slightly based on people that she knew growing up. It's one of her most personal, it is the most personal film that she ever made. And so I can see why she would be a little bit reluctant to finally finish it and part with it and let go of that because it's really a difficult thing to do.
A lot of people advocate who are film fans for, physical media and going to the movies and stuff. But another way to kind of really deepen your relationship with movies and movie makers is to read books like this one. Are there books that you read that were important to you when you started out on this journey that you were kind of thinking about?
Ooh, I mean, most of Sam Wasson's books from the start, Improv Nation was huge for me. I remember reading it and being like, I love the energy this book has. I love how full of life it feels, and it just pings along, and you can feel the sort of like comedic zeal to it in a way, and it just matches the vibe. And I remember thinking like, I've never liked dry biographies or dry nonfiction books, and I just remember being like, yeah, I want to write something that is fun and energetic and has a clear voice. I mean, there's this really great book. It's out of print from the 90s called Is That a Gun in Your Pocket? It's about women in film, and it's a bunch of like profiles of producers to writers to actor directors. Rachel Abramowitz wrote it. It's really, really great. It's really informative. What else? Not a book, but the Polly Platt season of You Must Remember This was really informative, influential, eye-opening, and helped me, yeah, have a deeper relationship with not just Peter Bogdanovich's films, but like that era of filmmaking, which Elaine was a part of.
What is one thing about Elaine that you will never fully understand?
Why she is so scared of speaking about herself and why she just is so, after all of these years, I mean, I know the factors going into it, but it's the hesitancy and the resistance to it and the resistance to like, people want to give you your flowers now. Like, why don't you want to accept them? Why don't you want to make sure that the story of your life is the story of your life? I guess. I guess like not understanding her disinterest in that. And it was something that I thought about a lot writing the book because I would sometimes just think like I can't fathom being a person who somebody else has had, like somebody else thinks they have the right to write about you, to write about your life, and you have no curiosity at all, no, I know, like nothing expressed to that person of like, how dare you? Or who are you? Like, who do you think you are? Like that is something I still don't understand. Like, I just personally can't comprehend. Like, if somebody else thought I'm gonna write the story of Carrie Corkin's life, I'd be like, excuse me? Like, without me? What? Or who is this person? Yeah, and I guess I don't know, there are so many other things. There's so many missing pieces that we'll never know that I feel sad that she will never share. And yeah, just like not understanding, I don't know, her approach to it. Because I guess I come from a perspective of like she's a public figure and she was such an instrumental part of history, so many different histories and so many different cultural movements, and how much of a right does a person have to die with that knowledge is something that I still just don't really fully understand her position on that.